Not far from Lighthouse Park, and just east of Cypress Creek in West Vancouver, is the setting of our story. It is now the location of a government research lab where priorities surrounding fish habitat and conservation are studied. This chart of Simon Fraser's from the early 1800s shows what has always been a fishing ground for the first peoples of this region. According to a short history of Caulfield Village, published in 1900, the only structures on this coastline was the Point Atkinson Lighthouse, a few scattered cabins, and the survey notes there was only one cow. Indian reservations were only recently established. Further east was St. Paul's Mission in North Vancouver. Then in 1900, the Defiance Cannery was founded by Arthur Sherman. When I heard that he had named it after a steamship, the Defiance, I was expecting a little larger craft. This is the boat John Cates used to transport people to Bowen Island. And it would make a port of call at the cannery. There was no ferry from Vancouver until 1909, at about the time this road was built, dangerous as it was. But in 1900, it was ready for the first canning season. And so we begin. The cannery was more than a factory. It was a community. A community of workers and a community of players. I was a player. Well, 50 years later, the adult in me decided to do some research. I started collecting pictures and talking to cannery people, and discovered how this odd little fishing village really did impact lives. The cannery was a political refuge for some, a restorative place for another with health problems. It was a shelter for those returning after the war. It was a means towards a university education, and where good leadership had a big heart. My first memory of the cannery was the front gate. I lived only seconds away from it. At school, I had made friends with kids who lived in the cannery, and I was able to summon up more and more courage to actually ride in. I knew I had to be quick. The gate would not be open for long. But oh, I remember that heroic feeling to finally make it through the gate. Some people called it the walled city, but it is not so easily defined. If you look down to the corner of the high fence on Marine Drive, you'll see a sign, 1891. Do you think the cannery actually got started then? Did they start building then?
The earliest record that we can find of canning output from that cannery is 1900. It may have been 1891 when they started to build, when they got the property, when they got water rights for a supply of fresh water. Very important for canneries which were outside the cities. They got the water from Cypress Creek. It was a good supply of fresh water. It came down Hollyburn Mountain. 1901 was the year of the big run. Every 4 years there was a huge run on the Fraser River. So they wanted to have the cannery ready for the 1901 run, and that's probably one reason that they got started in 1900. So the boats would have fished not too far from the cannery, but over towards the mouth of the Fraser, and it was a good location for getting the fish from that Fraser run.
At some point early in the century, the Defiance Cannery became the Great Northern Cannery. And it canned a great variety of fish throughout the decades. As well, it employed a variety of characters. The first record we have of a cannery resident is Tomokichi Homa. It was the same year the first ferry came from Vancouver. Tomokichi Homa started raising a family in the cannery. He was an educated man, an interpreter for immigrants, and a civil rights activist. To research the intriguing life of Tomokichi Homa, Frank and I met with his granddaughters at the Nikkei Museum and Cultural Center in Burnaby, where they gave us boxes of pictures to look through.
Obviously, these pictures were taken at the cannery somewhere, but that's Uncle Joe, and that's my dad. Look at the outfit. Look at the boots. And obviously, you know, looks like these boots for the picture, they were borrowed because that's way too big for his feet. You know?
He always talked about the samurai. He was a youngster, but he never talked about anything what he'd done himself. He was a well-educated man. He read Chinese as well as he read Japanese, just as well. People who couldn't read used to come to the house and with their books and newspaper, and Dad used to translate it for them.
Oh, and this is the one that we always see. This is in
Oh,
the
this
cannery.
is at the cannery with, look at with the wood pile.
Oh yeah, yeah.
See, so he must
And-
have been mobile at that
Yes.
point.
Homa's case for the right of Japanese Canadians to vote was won in a lower court in BC. When the court appealed it to the BC Supreme Court, he won again. But when the case went to Britain, he lost. The Privy Council basically saying that the provinces can continue to treat non-whites as second-class citizens.
I remember him very well, Tomokichi Homa, Grandpa. Oh my. Oh, I remember Grandma too, very well. Oh, how nice. I've never seen this picture of Mr. Homa, but I remember Grandma very well. She came to visit us quite often. Oh yes, how nice.
Because my grandfather had a stroke.
My mother said she never saw him standing.
Yeah.
People said he was a tall man, but she said she.
Seiji was the second son. He took over from his father.
That was taken inside the cannery with the fish.
Oh yeah, yeah.
It's about 25 or 26 when we got the food. And my brother, he had the honor to be there.
I was born January the 3rd, 1884, in the very early hours in the morning. Came to Canada in 1908.
A year after Tomokichi moved to the cannery, Francis Millard came over from Ireland. We don't have a younger picture of him. We'll hear later that Francis also had a legal run-in with the provincial government.
Francis Millard came to Canada in 1908. He landed at St. John's, New Brunswick, with $35 in his pocket, he said, and he classified himself as an entrepreneur. But he saw an ad in a window in downtown Vancouver, clerk wanted. And the clerk was wanted by ABC Packing, Anglo-British Columbia Packing, one of the very earliest canners, and he was hired. He was sent up to Knight Inlet and worked in the cannery there, teamed up with Captain Goss, and Goss Millard actually became one of the biggest salmon canners on the coast. The partnership broke up, and then my grandfather, Francis Millard, thought, well, why not introduce a floating cannery into British Columbia? Why not have the cannery on a vessel which could be towed from ground to ground? So he actually got an old sailing ship, and he put the cannery on there and towed it up to the Queen Charlotte Islands, and they canned like mad. He was charged with not having a license to operate a cannery, and the Privy Council in England, which was at that time the court of last resort for Canada, agreed with him. And so in 1927, finally, he was proved right. But by the end of that, of course, he had been shut down. He spent all sorts of money on lawyers, And so it was pretty difficult circumstances for him. So it wasn't until about 1935 that he took over the Great Northern Cannery.
Marie was a teenager when she arrived in the cannery in 1936.
It was because I came down with pneumonia. And after that, the doctor prescribed an area where you would be breathing some sea breeze, salt air. And then my mother found out there was a Japanese living near a fish cannery in West Vancouver, and we found one cabin open. So my mom and I moved there for the summer, planning to stay for the summer. But then we stayed on and on and on. Japanese living near a fish cannery in West Vancouver. And then when my father comes back from the north with his boat, he can moor his boat there, you see. Most of the people in that area, the Japanese anyway, brothers and fathers were all fishermen, and they had their own boat. I've lived all my life near the water, but I never learned how to swim properly. But I did fall in the water once from a high place, and my foot slipped and I went down.
Oh.
There was a bunkhouse of Chinese people working in the cannery. I think one Chinese man piggybacked me home. I also helped doing some labeling too. Labeling on the quarter-pound cans, half-pound cans.
British Columbia's canned salmon labels are favorably known throughout the world and are synonymous with the highest in quality.
All right. I think it's still good too.
Oh.
How old is that, Gary?
That's got to be 55 years old. Let's try it.
Might taste like metal. What do you think, John?
Another great character from the cannery was Josephine Charlie. Before moving to the cannery, Josephine was the subject and narrator of a film called $10 or Nothing. This was about First Nations rights for equal wages.
I'm Barbara Charlie, daughter of late Josephine Charlie. She was the forelady. She started working with Millard. My sister and I both worked there when we were 15 and 16. I went to West Van High. I was the only Indian in the high school. So my mother said that if I wanted to dress like the kids there, I should work and then buy my own clothing, which is what I did, my sister too. And the salary then was 85 cents an hour. I remember getting my first check and it was $86. And my cousin, she's since passed away, we worked the same, she got the same amount. And I told her, oh, I got my first check. She said, I did too, and we were hopping around in the cannery. I had the energy in those days.
I just had a gas lamp. I wake up my little girl, you better eat something.
But my mom was always, she worked up north in canneries and got the people there active in the union. They made changes to fit the people that were working there.
And I helped them. 8 o'clock it blows again, the whistle, that's for us fillers. Off we run, the ones that are washing.
And then when we moved down here to Capilano, she started working with Millard, and they were good to her. They got along well. And so she worked there many years. Worked with the Japanese families. There were quite a number of them. I grew up with a lot of their children, and they worked in the cannery too.
What I recall of Mrs. Charlie was, she was a short, round person, and she always seemed to be quite happy.
Yeah, she was always smiling.
Yeah.
I think, wasn't she a ladies' foreman or something
Yes.
like that?
Yeah.
And our families got along, like even at Christmas time got together, or meal times. They would invite my mother to go and have lunch or dinner with them. So she learned about their foods. And my mom got along with everybody.
Every fish is examined individually. Women inspectors, shining with cleanliness, proud of their part in preparing this food product, look over each fish as it comes from the iron chink.
And during my time, the Chinese were there working in the mines. It was a very interesting period.
On his audio tape, Francis Millard talks about being enlisted in the Boer War in South Africa, and he expressed a true interest in the Chinese workers that were there. And when he came to Vancouver, one of his goals was to go to China. But his wife Anne, as he puts it, would have none of it. I think this interest Francis had in the Asian people would be an attitude that would come in handy for what lay ahead. But first, the event that would change West Vancouver forever. It was 1938.
It's a happy day, toodaloo-loo-loo-loo-lay. For you and me, for us and we, all the clouds have rolled away.
It was the Guinness family that made the deal. But along with it came a bylaw that said, no Asiatic person should be employed in or upon any part of the undertaking or works. The film footage you are seeing now was shot by someone in the Millard family. There's Don Millard on the right. We found this film in an old box and got it transferred. It has most certainly never been seen by the public until now. King George VI presided over the official opening of the bridge in May of 1939. It was quite the fanfare. And the Great Northern One was decorated to be in the flotilla. That looks like Frank Millard, Francis's son, walking up the deck in perfect timing. First Nations participate. And is that the Queen Mary? All is well in the British Empire, until this happens. Production at the cannery increases for mostly canned herring and sardines as they are shipped overseas. Here, all the workers come out for a promotional photo to encourage the investing in war bonds. And then this happens.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin. The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii by air.
I think this being forced to move, forced to sell your home and your car and your fishing boat was very difficult.
Of course, all of a sudden the Japanese were all clumped into one, enemy aliens, and had to leave 100 miles inland.
Well, that they confiscated the chopsticks thinking they were weapons. And I remember her saying he was really disappointed
more than anything.
Yeah,
I remember that
really
too.
hurt.
The main point was that these RCMP officers had been their friend, and a few hours before Pearl Harbor had taken place, or maybe the day before, they had been friends. And now all of a sudden there was this enemy, and he said we hadn't basically changed. I often wondered why we came back to the cannery. So I have no idea. I didn't know if my dad had gone to them. I wasn't too sure. So that's something.
When the war ended, or it was already ended, at the time, there was a fellow that came to Kelowna to find out who would go back fishing for the. And at the time, Dad was covering this. Is well, we can't live on this farm, and we don't even make any money. We're going down here. We won't be poor. So he decided fishing is better for us, so he came back because of that. Yeah, and then that's how we came back. But Millard has promised Dad that, you know, he'll build the boat, he will lend us money, lend him money, and then when you're able to pay, pay. So that's what most of the fishermen did. That's why my dad was able to come back fishing.
So the war is over, and a new generation begins. The baby boomers. It will be the last generation of the Great Northern Cannery.
We were, kids underfoot, as it were. We were probably just a lot of trouble. There was quite a few of us. So even though I was the second oldest grandchild, Frank being the first, my grandmother didn't like living there. She felt very isolated. They would have summer parties and things like that, and but we were right in the middle of the cannery, so it's right in the middle of the sort of the little city, as it were. And she was a wonderful woman, and I think she sort of softened him, or at least softened his kind of crusty matter-of-factness. He had a real sense of purpose. He didn't take fools lightly. I remember once, as a teenager, we all sort of worked there before we were probably legally supposed to, but packing cans and boxes, and he was just fed up at how slow he thought we all were, and started throwing, boxes at us upstairs there in the loft, as it were.
No, that's not Francis reincarnated. We decided to do a little dramatization to a story about Francis that John had. I made him dress up. It's my fault.
I don't know who told me the story, but when my grandfather was walking around and checking things out, he could always tell who wasn't working hard and who was. If he saw somebody suddenly jump to attention and turn to the task, he knew that they weren't working as hard.
Hello, sir.
If somebody was working hard, they'd usually stop for a bit, say hi, and carry on.
My earliest memories of Grandpa would be going to see him with the family on a Sunday type thing. He was never seen without a tie, a bow tie mostly, well dressed. There was no question about who was in charge. He had an opinion on everything. And I think his opinions probably were as close to rules as you could get. Looking back on it, the whole thing was from another era. All the people lived around on the site, and there was a store and there was a cafeteria and all these things, but in the center of it was the manager's house.
And your grandparents had a beautiful sunroom.
Yeah.
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 And we still always walk by and look and oh, wow, this is how the rich people live.
I look back at the pictures now and think that it was sort of a dynasty. We were the privileged ones. And yet, our family felt really, really strongly for the Japanese. We loved them. And I have very fond memories of them. Yeah.
Now I'm on a mission. I'm going to talk to Yoshi, 50 years after this picture was taken.
And so your new home, do you remember when you first saw your new home?
Lots of people living there. And we had to go around the back, and it wasn't bad. It was a lovely place. There's lots of buildings around the cannery, quite different from what I expect to see.
So in 1951, you came to the cannery and you had 2 children?
Yes, I brought the 2 babies.
2 babies, Rick and Kathy?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Rick was 1 month old, and Kathy she had her 2nd birthday at the cannery.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh. When Dick started fishing in the cannery, he was on his own.
First, he was just using the cannery boat. Then he built his own boat, and it was called the Catherine N.
Oh.
Mr. Hirano built lots of boats there, and his boat was one of them.
Oh, that's interesting because
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Hirano also built our house.
He did?
Yes,
Oh,
so he was quite the builder.
Oh, he was. In that row of houses, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 8 families lived in that whole row. But that building burnt down. It was scary. Yeah. All I could do is take the kids and get out. So we had to move, and all the other families who had lost their houses moved into the bunkhouse. It was a terrible fire, you know. From the upstairs bunkhouse, we moved to one of the houses overlooking the water. The Hayashi used to live in there. And one side, the Hombas used to live there, and the Hayashis. And the Hayashis moved out to town. We got to live in that house. We could see the ocean. It was a lovely place.
Well, that's the house I remember. That's the house I almost grew up in. Cause we played there a lot.
Played around, yeah.
You were always very nice to us kids.
Well, children are children, you know.
Yeah.
Oh.
And we always played games there and wrestled on the carpet and played solitaire. And
it was the safest place.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yes. I don't think there's a place like that these days. No, I think we were very lucky.
Yeah, I was not that interested in going out on the boat, so I had lots of interest here in town, played in boys' bands, and so I worked in the office. That's when I worked when I was definitely underage. Worked in the office. I answered the phone, you know, when you had the phone things where you plugged in. I thought that was a hoot. Both accountants stood up, you know, the old style where you could lay all the books out. They stood up and they went from one book to another. And then behind him in another office, although in a sort of open office feeling, he wasn't shut off as my dad. In the summer, I basically would go back to the lid machine because it was pretty straightforward and it was boring as hell, but I think it's partly why my hearing's so bad.
there you are.
Oh, Gary.
Hi.
How are you?
Good.
Were you? Oh, no, maybe you weren't even there then. 1950, when we all got together in our kimonos to meet the Queen.
Okay, be 1, 2, 3, okay? So you got 1 is Betty Nakatani. This is Mrs. Endel that I was telling you about. I don't know what Curly's real name was. We called him Curly. He was the engineer. From 1950 to, we figured about 1958 or 59. At that time, my sister, Yoshiko, and my grandmother, Kumae Haya, ran the restaurant for the workers at the cannery. They lived in the same building as the restaurant was in. Well, the whistle goes at, say, 12 o'clock for lunchtime, and everybody came in at once. So my grandmother already had the food cooked, and of course they didn't have a choice as what to have. The meals were set. So if you were going to eat, you got whatever she cooked. And then we sold cigarettes, chocolate bars, pop,
A lot of people brought their lunch, so they would just come in and buy coffee or pop, but they couldn't sit in the mess hall because there wasn't that much room. And then she cooked for people that lived there, like Curly and Romeo. They stayed there. They had their own rooms in one of the buildings, and of course they were fed breakfast, lunch, and supper by my grandmother.
So she was the provider.
Yes, yes, yes.
As was Hiroko for the Millard kids.
Then there was that exciting time when Hollywood came to the Cannery Village.
When they made the movie Sweet and the Bitter, so my mother decided she's going to start making them dinner because she liked to cook. Yeah.
We're 15, now you're working in the cannery. Do you work on the line?
Yes, we worked on the line. But the tins will come down, and if you didn't work fast enough, you were in trouble, because then, you know, the cans are going too light and they get rejected and sent back. And then when we did hand packing, Mrs. Charlie, who was the floor lady, she would throw back the cans at you. If they were too full, she squeezed the cans, as she could tell, and then pieces of the fish, you know, would come out, and then she'd throw those all back at you, and it was all piecework. So if you didn't do it properly and you had to fix all that, you were in trouble because you're not going to make the money. I think one of the ladies that was the fastest hand packer was Mrs. Ikeda. Yeah, you couldn't keep up to her. She was so fast.
Funny, I just remember I used to play double solitaire all the time, and they were always beat me because they're so fast.
All of us that grew up in the cannery there in our teenage years are still friends, you know, and we stay in touch with each other, which is really nice, yeah.
One of the characters I remember in the cannery was a guy by the name of Romeo, and Romeo, as I recall, was fairly short. He was a handyman kind of guy, but he did all the crap jobs around the cannery. I remember one of the jobs he had was to paint the fence all the way around the cannery, which is acres and acres of fence. But the funny thing was that my grandfather would choose to have his fancy car driven by a chauffeur, and Romeo was the guy that he chose to drive him around.
Now, Romeo ran these boilers, and he blew one out.
Oh, is that right?
Remember that? Nobody got hurt. It just so happened that it was lunchtime, but Romeo went backwards off the wharf with the forklift.
Oh.
Did anybody tell you that story?
No.
And he went right into the water backwards. But he was okay.
Yeah.
They got the forklift down too.
When I was a tiny baby, I came home to a cannery shack, which was next door to my grandparents inside the cannery. And that was our first house. It was close to the boatyards where they built boats, because at one point they built gill nets down there at the very far end of the property.
Oh, now I remember. I used to ride my bike down there to get steel ball bearings that we used to use for marbles. I wouldn't have noticed Yoshi across the street or Susan's mom, Babs, posing with their cars. But then a lot of us posed with their cars in those days.
Come on in, guys. This is the start of the Cannery Museum here.
Wowie, look at this. Has that nice smell of the cannery.
We're here at Robert's museum. He's just getting started up here, a museum in Sayward. He's collected a number of boats. That's a gill netter from the 30s, I believe. Your dad was a builder. What do you recall?
I recall some memories of the boatyard and the ways, you know, where the boats would be pulled up and down, these long ramps. And I remember the christening, I think, of Vivian O. That I was quite young. I recall it was 53, so, you know, I'd be 5 years old at that time. But I remember, I think it was, you know, the bottle being smashed on the bow and the boat going down. A lot of festivities and, you know, excitement for the launching of the boat. It was a very special event. The other thing I remember about the boatyard was just playing around the ways and, you know, all the old machinery and the smell of the cedar, the smell of the steamed cedar, because they used to have these long steam boxes where they would steam the wood so that they could bend it to, you know, make the shape of the bow. So those are some of the memories I have. Then I also recall that in the garage, I remember that my father had a lot of model hulls of boats, like miniature hulls of those. I guess my father actually built these models and then used that as a replica and, you know, to scale it up to make a large boat. I mean, that's how he did it. The cannery was its own little enclave. You go through the gate and you're in a totally different space, you know, different culture almost. And that was a comforting feeling, you know.
Here is Mr. Nakata mending his nets. We go past what we called the ghost house and down the road to the Nakatas and Homa's place, where I spent much of my youth. 50 years later, I visited the Nakatas and I met my old friend David Nakatani.
Well, how do you like me with, I used to have bangs and I used to be skinny. That's great.
No kidding.
Well, that's, I think it's over 45 years.
Dougie Millard was over here too, right?
Yeah.
Playing around. He was on the boat. And Dougie was running around on the back of the Packer boat. He was running and he tripped and he was flying off and fell in the water.
Just like I used to go to Doug's house, 50 years later, I visit him with John Millard to check out David Nakatani's story.
He remembers very traumatically when you fell in.
Oh God, I was hoping this wasn't going to come up. The day I almost drowned.
Well, that was serious, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was pretty bad.
But
I think I went down 3 times.
Oh, did you?
And I think,
You know,
yeah, I think it might have even been David that somebody saved me anyways, pulled me out.
Brian dove in.
And saved them?
Yeah, he saved them. Oh yeah, he dove in.
Who saved them?
Brian.
Huh?
It was quite unique for a cannery company to have a fleet of boats named after it. Doug and John will navigate us through the Great Northern Cannery boats.
Flags? Yeah, this is actually a Canadian Fishing Company, but it's a good one. No, and the Great Northern one was important to fly it right. Remember, white was always up, so that's how it was on the pole.
Look at that. Have you ever seen
Yeah, I
a
like
picture
that.
of that
That's an
boat
old
there?
one. Yeah, I like that picture. This one, you have the Great Northern 8 and the Lutak. This is in Finn Bay.
Yeah. The Helena B. Remember
That was my
That was
favorite.
the boat I first went up north.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Helena B,
That's a sweet little boat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
It
cute
sank.
little boat. Oh, they all sank one time, yeah.
You don't have a picture of the Great Northern 6?
Might in the other room. I'm not too sure. What's this one down here? Is that the 3?
I think that's the 5.
That's 5?
Yeah.
John's got glasses on. Yeah,
I
the
can't.
Stroms.
This is my favorite, the Great Northern 3.
Yeah.
I love that boat.
Well, that was probably one of the flagships, eh?
Yeah, it was gorgeous.
Yeah.
Was it your favorite?
Yep.
I'll never forget it. I was working in the office and I had never been up north. And I kept saying to Dad, I want to go up north. I want to see what my brothers are doing. The Great Northern 8 was down at the Cannery and they were leaving, and I put my sleeping bag under my arm like this and I said, Dad, I'm going on that boat and I'm going up to see my brothers. And so he ran down to the boat, and he said to Charlie Strom, now, I want you to look after her, take down all those girly pictures you've got on the boat, take them all down, and I want you to take her up to Jones Cove and see Dawn and blah, blah, blah. I helped out and I made, I helped cook and all that kind of stuff, and I saw my brothers and stuff like that. Yes.
All right.
I was the first one. But then, after that, like 20 years later, there were women that went on boats, and they went on seine boats.
There were exposed caulk wheels that my glove caught into that caulk wheel, and it started to drag the glove in, so my fingers got caught.
And all the cans had to be opened up to make sure that they found that finger before the cans went out.
The first aid guy came to me and said, Brian, if they can put your finger back on, I've got it right here in my breast pocket. And with that notice, I passed out.
And I actually went to grad with him, and it was a constant reminder of what the cannery meant,
The cannery was good. I had 5 summers of employment. The people that worked there, the Japanese families that were on the cannery were fantastic people, most welcoming. In fact, some of the families, Ronnie Homa and his family were the ones that I got to know very, very well.
Actually, there were several fires, so it was like a fire alarm, and then obviously Dad would get up and rush out and see what's going on, and I think his thought was that maybe this was telling him something, that again that there was perhaps an end date.
I remember as a kid, when I was very young, watching the boats coming in, because I lived right on the waterfront, and at first the boats were very low in the water, almost sinking, and as time went on, they became higher in the water, and it was obvious they were catching less fish, so, and even as a kid, I had goldfish, and I always took an interest in fish itself, so I ended up working for the Salmon Enhancement Program.
I think there's a tendency to look back at those old days with fondness for their sustainability and so on and so forth. The fact of the matter was that everybody was catching as much fish as they could. They were robbing as many creeks as they could without getting caught. Technology came along, and it allowed us to be much more effective in how we catch fish. The technology of catching fish grew faster than our abilities to restrain it.
Having a cannery in a residential area made it very difficult to get approval for changes. There was a proposal to sell the property and put in apartment buildings, but the neighbors really raised quite a stink about that. People thought, oh well, it must smell fishy there, but no, it never smelled fishy because the fish was fresh. It wasn't smelly fish. The only time there was a smell was when they were canning clams, and they would cook the clams in great big drums, and at that time of the year, usually in the winter, there was an onshore wind, so you got this whiff of clam chowder over most of the neighborhood. So it became difficult to continue at that location, and so in 1968 the cannery was sold to the Fisheries Research Board of Canada.
And because of his strong feeling about fisheries, that property was not sold for condominiums. It went to fisheries.
There are many more stories out there, as many as there were fish you could catch off the docks of the cannery. But if I were to pick a sequel to this cannery story, it would be this. After the cannery was gone, Don Millard owned a fish company of his own. He hired a Vietnamese immigrant who one day went to him and asked for financial help.
He said, I'll give you the money and you can pay me back at the end of the summer. Well, he did. And that was the way it was.
After hearing these tales about the Great Northern Cannery, it seems that a theme emerges. That Cannery people bridge social barriers. That's what the headlines should read. One day, I rode out of the cannery for the last time. I thought I'd be back someday, and in a sense, I was right.
It's a happy day, toodaloo-loo-loo-loo-lay. For you and me, for us and we, all the clouds have rolled away. It's a happy day, toodaloo-loo-loo-loo-lay. The sun shines bright and the world's all right. It's a happy day. 4 and 20 sunbeams are dancing round my face. 4 and 20 more are dancing every place. It's a happy day, toodaloo-loo-loo-loo-lay. You can't go wrong if you sing.
One more time. To the cannery. To the cannery.